Taiwan might be winning a much-needed victory against China. China can't save Russia. And TikTok made employees swear an oath to defend Chinese socialism. Then more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Incogni. You probably know the companies are collecting your personal data, but you may not realize just how many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of which you've never heard of, and you have no idea what they're doing with it. Incogni helps stop them. I'll explain more at the end. The Taiwanese dollar is on the verge of overtaking China's yuan as Asia's top funding currency. And I'm sure China isn't worried about that since they say that Taiwan is part of China. Yep, not worried at all. Basically, the yuan is controlled by the Chinese state. It can create wild swings in borrowing costs, especially in anticipation of Donald Trump's potential tariffs on China. Beijing has intensified efforts to manipulate the yuan's exchange rate. According to Bloomberg, Taiwan's central bank, on the other hand, can afford to be more relaxed as any weakness in the local currency ends up benefiting the export-driven economy and can attract artificial intelligence-led capital flows into local stocks. In other words, Taiwan is okay with its currency not being worth that much, and the government won't manipulate its value. What happens is investors use low interest rate currency, like the Taiwanese dollar, to buy higher yield assets in places with currency with higher interest rates. The end result is basically that investors make more money. This ties into something I've been talking about on this show for a while, but in particular on this episode, the fact that Xi Jinping is facing a choice: to do something to improve China's flailing economy, but relinquish his iron fist control over everything, or double down on the authoritarianism. I'll give you one guess what Xi is choosing. China has issued an ominous warning to the U.S. over escalating a so-called tech war. In the final days of the Biden administration, the U.S. blacklisted, sanctioned, and banned several Chinese companies that it's accused of either having ties to the People's Liberation Army, using slave labor, or posing a national security risk. A lot of those companies are in the technology sector, or have significant holdings in the tech sector at the very least. The shares for some of those companies, like Tencent, started to tank shortly after the announcement. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Jiakun criticized the United States' malicious attempts to block and suppress China's semiconductor industry and stressed that no sanction or suppression will stop China's development and progress, and no bullying or coercion will weaken China's resolve in boosting its own strengths. Yeah, its strength in using slave labor, such development and progress. China always releases statements like these and business carries on as usual. Maybe they should get more creative when trying to threaten people. Or stop being such despicable scumbags, that's my 2 cents, which they could probably use considering how poorly their economy is doing. Chinese and Indian refineries are scouring the world for oil supplies as new U.S. sanctions on Russia kick in. The new sanctions are targeting these 2 Russian oil producers, along with 183 Russian oil-delivering vessels, many of which have carried already sanctioned Russian oil to India and China. And it seems to be working, unlike the previous sanctions. I guess it's true what they say: if at first you don't succeed, expand the sanctions to include the ships carrying the oil. China has routinely slammed unilateral sanctions, especially if they come from the White House, but this is causing a headache for the Chinese Communist Party because now it has to weigh whether or not to risk continued shipments of sanctioned oil or buy more expensive energy from other countries. Doing business with a shady authoritarian regime looked down on by much of the Western world, or paying more, tough call. So Russia is probably about to lose a couple of customers in their oil market, but it gets worse for Russia. It turns out that China's support for Russia falls short in replacing Western materials, according to the Moscow Times. Despite the initial surge in exports to Russia after it invaded Ukraine, trade growth between the 2 countries is starting to stagnate. I guess the limit to the no-limits partnership is the cruel, biting sting of reality. Chinese exports fell short in several categories, including aircraft, pharmaceuticals, plastics and polymers, and electrical equipment. That doesn't mean that the CCP can't still take advantage of them. I mean, assist their dear friend Putin, though. Like, a Chinese firm is pouncing on Russia's fire sale of prized assets. by buying a Russian coal mine that was on the verge of bankruptcy. Russian state news agency Interfax reported that an unnamed Chinese company would buy Inskaya mine, which faced claims from Russia's Federal Tax Service of over $2 million and complaints from workers of unpaid wages. Meanwhile, just last month, Russia sold its stakes in some Kazakh uranium deposits to Chinese-owned companies. Looks like that no-limits partnership is turning into a no-limits ownership. But to be fair, China needs all that coal. How else is it going to continue honoring its commitment of going green? And after the break, there are big problems with the CCP's dams in Tibet. Welcome back. TikTok forced staff to swear oaths to uphold China's socialist system, which is probably the least surprising thing I've heard so far this year. The Daily Caller News Foundation obtained documents related to an unemployment lawsuit against TikTok from Katie Purse, a former marketing executive for the app. In 2024, Purse accused her employer, along with its parent company ByteDance, of gender and age-based discrimination, and alleged that TikTok's day-to-day operations are controlled by ByteDance, which has ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Douyin, basically the Chinese version of TikTok, was also implicated in the lawsuit. I assume ByteDance will respond, the Chinese Communist Party? Who? We swear we have nothing to do with all those handsome, all-powerful, all-knowing heroes. Purse joined TikTok in late 2019 and says she was required to sign a user agreement with Douyin's Feishu employee stock ownership plan in order to access information related to her stock options. And what did that agreement say? You shall comply with applicable laws and guidelines and abide by public order and good customs, the socialist system, national interests, legal rights of other citizens, and information authenticity requirements. Boy, they really tried slipping the socialist system in there, didn't they? The document also lists other prohibited actions, including overthrowing the socialist system, inciting secession, and promoting cults and superstitions. What do they think their employees are thinking? Man, I was going to secretly overthrow everything this country stands for, but they made me promise I wouldn't. Plus, they have great dental benefits. Other documents indicated that TikTok ultimately considered Purse to be an employee of ByteDance, that she was forced to sign a form agreeing with this, and that she even had to report directly to Beijing-based representatives from ByteDance and Douyin. These documents were submitted to U.S. government officials as part of the TikTok case in the Supreme Court, which might be part of why it didn't go so well for TikTok. Neither the CCP nor TikTok are commenting on the report, although TikTok has said that it can't comment on falsehoods presented to advance political agendas. Of course, being accused by TikTok of lying to spread a political agenda is like being accused of spreading fires by an arsonist. You should work at a movie theater because you're great at projecting. China has reported problems at several reservoirs in Tibet after a devastating earthquake on the plateau. The problems were found at 5 out of 14 hydropower dams that were inspected and mostly involved cracks. Although I wouldn't be surprised if there were cracks there before the earthquake, since the CCP's infrastructure is about as sturdy as saltines after soaking in clam chowder. But cracks aren't the only issue, as the walls of one hydro dam were found to have tilted, prompting the evacuation of about 1,500 people from 6 villages downstream to higher grounds. Of the 5 reservoirs affected, 3 have since been emptied. The United Nations warned China about the risks of building dams in earthquake-prone Tibet. And yes, the UN got something correct for once. Looks like there'll be one more time today that broken clock will be right. Too damn bad it had to be something tragic. The devastating earthquake injured thousands and caused immense damage, which of course has been blamed by local residents on shoddy Chinese infrastructure. So far, 126 people have been reported killed by the earthquake. And since it's the CCP reporting these figures, I'm sure it's totally accurate and totally holds water, just like their not at all horribly constructed dams. China has executed 2 men for so-called revenge on society crimes that killed 40 individuals. Fan Wei-chu, a 62-year-old man, was executed for ramming his car into a crowd outside a sports stadium in Zhuhai, in southern China, killing at least 35 people and seriously injuring 43 others. Authorities stated that Fan was motivated by a desire to get revenge on society for his unsatisfactory divorce settlement. Meanwhile, Xu Jiajin, a 21-year-old man, was executed for a stabbing spree at his vocational school in Wuxi in eastern China, after he failed his graduation exams. He killed 8 people and injured 17. Both men were sentenced to death by Intermediate People's Courts in December 2024, and their sentences were approved by the Supreme People's Court before their executions on Monday. China keeps its death penalty statistics classified, but human rights groups believe that thousands are carried out annually, usually by gunshot. And don't worry, they won't let those precious organs go to waste. Xi Jinping has urged local authorities to take harsher security measures to prevent any such attacks in the future that could damage the safe-for-tourists image he tried carefully to craft for the country. Because while people getting killed is sad, the real tragedy would be if Xi Jinping looked bad. Now, I've got a video to show you that you're going to love. But first, this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Whenever you do anything online or use apps on your phones, there are tons of companies that collect your personal data. I'm talking name, social security number, home address, employment history, all sorts of things you might not want to be public knowledge. When I signed up for Incogni 3 years ago, I discovered there were dozens of data brokers that potentially had my private information without my permission. This was terrifying. So what did I do? I've been getting as many of these companies as possible to delete my data from their systems. I did it using Incogni, and you can too. Incogni has already gotten my details removed from 426 of these data brokers who've collected my info, and I didn't have to do anything after signing up. Incogni just handles it. So get Incogni for yourself and reclaim your own data. Go to incogni.com/uncensored and use the code uncensored to get 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Get your personal data off the market with Incogni. And before YouTube's algorithm sends you off to some random video, check out this video about how the CCP is so paranoid they're going to war against people having fun. It's a premium video on our new website, ChinaUncensored.tv, but it's only for serious fans. Link is below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.